My name is Justin Reed, and I'm a professor of Hebrew Bible or Old Testament at Louisville Seminary. The courses that I teach often involve the history of how Black people have engaged with the Bible and the consequences of biblical interpretation on Black people and other minoritized communities. And so, with that in mind, I was invited to share this curriculum on honoring God's diversity. In the last aspect, we saw Jesus tell someone no to a healing because of her ethnicity. We saw Jesus refer to this woman as a dog. That's not pretty. At least in that aspect, we have this beautiful silver lining in that Jesus learns, and we too can follow Jesus' example to learn and progress and be better than that which we were enculturated into before. As if that wasn't tough enough, I've got more uncomfortable texts for us to think about. In thinking about honoring God's diversity, it sounds kind of counterintuitive to bring up a text like 1 Timothy chapter 2, verses 11 to 15. It's a passage that kind of ugly. But we need to keep in mind that we're thinking about systems, ideas, and methods that are toxic and need to be changed, transformed in order to honor God's diversity. And so in our first aspect, I mentioned that one of the ways that we do that is by foregrounding Genesis 1:27 as a central text when we come across other texts like 1 Timothy 2:11 to 15. So now we get a chance to look at a text like that and see what it looks like when we encounter those difficult texts. The passage starts with an unequivocal statement. Let a woman learn in silence and full submission. I permit no woman to teach or have authority over a man. And then to repeat it, she is to keep silent. Then the writer goes on to explain this submission as based on the author's interpretation of the story of Adam and Eve. Ouch. I hope that this is a passage that makes you uncomfortable or angry, determined, hurt. I hope you feel something. As a Christian, how do we handle tough texts like these? In this aspect of the curriculum, I look at the example shown by Maria Stewart. I find a lot of strength in looking to the legacy of my people for guidance in situations like this. Of course, I don't blindly follow everybody and what they did in the past. Besides that being silly, it's technically impossible to follow everyone. But here, I get something to follow because I love it when I'm confronted by a tough situation and I see an ancestor who shows their ability to finesse their way through with courage and wisdom. As a Black woman in the 19th century, Maria Stewart was facing interpretations of passages like 1 Timothy 2:11 to 15, with people wanting to discount her calling from God. The quote that I've included is worth rereading. She says, "What if I'm a woman? Is not the God of ancient times the God of these modern days? Did God not raise up Deborah to be a mother and a judge in Israel? Did not Queen Esther save the lives of the Jews and Mary Magdalene first declare the resurrection of Christ from the dead? Come," said the woman of Samaria, "and see a man that hath told me all the things that ever I did. Is this not the Christ?" And here you see Maria Stewart is doing something very similar to what her detractors do. She's taking the Bible and looking at what's there in the text and saying, this is my guidance for what I do in life. This is how I understand the mind of God and the path that God wants for me. And so she's taking texts that show women's leadership, including leadership over men, including the proclamation of the gospel, and saying that's the model that I'm following. Now, in these respects, she's doing something very similar to what her detractors are doing, but then there's a shift. She says, St. Paul declared that it was a shame for a woman to speak in public. Yet our great high priest and advocate did not condemn the woman for a more notorious offense than this, neither will he condemn this worthless worm. Drawing on texts like the one I mentioned from 1 Timothy, drawing on a text like John 8, she's putting together texts directly against each other, and then she goes further. Did St. Paul but know of our wrongs and deprivations, I presume he would make no objection to our pleading in public for our rights. Now here is the interesting shift that I really want us to pay attention to. Here we see Stuart making the text relevant by putting Paul in dialogue with herself and with the real world. She uses her imagination and she puts the oppression that she knows as a woman in place of prominence for understanding the will of God. She imagines, what if Paul really understood? What if we were coming from a similar place? Honoring God's diversity means that we need to pay intentional and particular attention to the real oppression that's going on in the world today. Justice and equality lead to honoring God's diversity. Inclusion without justice, without equity, is still evil. With boldness, Stuart challenges us to be intentional about paying attention to the oppression that we see when we interpret the Bible, so that we can have life-giving interpretations that generate wholeness for those most vulnerable in our communities.